Dr. Nolan Graves had seen his fair share of difficult cases. A human veterinarian aboard the interstellar station Varlos Prime, he had treated creatures with acidic blood, self-regenerating limbs, and even one particularly nasty cephalopod that could mimic a patient's exact injury just to confuse the medical staff. But this was the first time he'd ever been summoned to an alien clinic to deal with a case that was outright refused by its own specialists. The call had come from a frantic station administrator, some insectoid bureaucrat who barely got the words out before disconnecting. When Nolan arrived at the pristine, sterilized alien facility, he found a group of medical professionals standing several meters away from a reinforced cage, their biosuits reflecting the harsh clinic lights. Inside the enclosure, a massive beast lay curled in the farthest corner, shivering despite its thick, dark blue fur. Its golden eyes flickered toward the figures watching it, and a deep growl rumbled from its chest. Dr. Graves, a four-armed reptilian alien, easily 2 feet taller than Nolan, approached stiffly. His scaled face was tight with irritation. "I am Chief Veterinarian Masrick. You were summoned because," his eyes flicked to the shuddering beast, "we are unwilling to treat this creature." Nolan crossed his arms. "You called me all the way here just to say that." Masrick exhaled sharply, his forked tongue flicking out in frustration. "We called you because this thing is an apex virak. It is the undisputed top predator of its homeworld. It has no natural threats. It is genetically designed for killing." He turned to glare at the beast. "And it is wounded." Nolan arched an eyebrow. "Okay. So why aren't you treating it?" Masrick hissed. "Because it is dangerous." Nolan scoffed. "Yeah, no kidding. So are most creatures I work with." "You do not understand. A virak never submits. If it is showing weakness, it means it is desperate." Masrick's nostrils flared. "And a desperate predator is more lethal than a healthy one." Nolan frowned, stepping closer to the cage. The creature's breathing was uneven, its muscles twitching every so often. He noticed a thin streak of dark fluid running down its hind leg. "Looks like it's been wounded for a while." "3 cycles," Masrick muttered. "No one will risk treating it. Even in agony, it could kill any one of us before we react." Nolan crouched, peering into the cage. The creature's ears flicked toward him, but it made no move to attack. Its golden eyes locked onto his, but there was something there beyond primal rage. Something almost pleading. He exhaled. "It's not going to kill anyone. It's just scared." Masrick let out a series of sharp clicks that Nolan assumed was laughter. "Scared? The virak does not feel fear." Nolan shrugged. "Maybe not fear the way we understand it, but it's injured, surrounded, and stuck in a cage. Any animal would be terrified in that situation." He pointed to the deep gash on the creature's flank. "You see the way its body is positioned? It's keeping weight off that side. If it were about to attack, it would have already lunged the moment I got close." Masrick sneered. "You humans think you understand all things simply because you survive them. Your species has no instinct for caution." "Or maybe," Nolan countered, "we just understand that not every wounded animal is looking to bite the first hand that tries to help." Masrick gestured sharply to one of his assistants. "Open the cage." The group of alien medical professionals recoiled in alarm. One, a short, feathered being, let out a startled screech. "You cannot be serious. You wish to let the human go in there? It will slaughter him." Masrick's gaze remained locked onto Nolan. Let him prove his theory. The mechanical hiss of the containment field deactivating sent an eerie hush through the room. Nolan stepped inside, moving slowly but deliberately. The virak growled a low, guttural sound but did not move. Nolan knelt a few feet away, keeping his hands open and visible. "Hey, big guy, you look like you've had a rough time." The creature's ears twitched. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, catching his scent. "Bet you're in a lot of pain," Nolan continued, keeping his voice even. "That's gotta be scary. But I'm not here to hurt you." He reached into his medical bag, pulling out a small container. "I've got something that'll make you feel better." The virak's growl deepened. Nolan slowly opened the container, revealing a chunk of dried meat and emergency ration he always carried. He set it on the floor and backed up slightly. See? Just food, no tricks. The creature hesitated. Then, in a single fluid motion, it snatched the meat and swallowed it whole. Nolan smiled. Good boy. The Varak's ears flattened slightly, not in aggression, but something closer to relief. Behind him, Masrick watched in disbelief. You fed it? Of course, Nolan said. First step to trust, he gestured to the injured leg. Now I need to take a closer look. The Varak's body tensed as Nolan reached toward the wound, but it did not snap at him. It merely watched, wary but still. Nolan worked quickly, applying a numbing agent before inspecting the damage. It wasn't as deep as he feared, but the infection had started to spread. You're lucky, he muttered. Nothing broken, but you've been dragging this around too long. The Varak exhaled almost a huff of frustration, but not at him, at itself. I know, Nolan chuckled. Being injured sucks. He worked efficiently, cleaning the wound and applying an antibiotic patch. The whole time, the massive beast remained still, only occasionally flicking its tail in irritation. When Nolan finally sat back, he met the Varak's eyes once more. The golden gaze was no longer filled with fear or rage. It was curious. Nolan grinned. See? That wasn't so bad. He stood and turned to Masrick, who was staring at him as if he had just defied physics itself. You were saying? Nolan asked. Masrick's mouth opened, then closed. He exhaled sharply. You are either the bravest fool I have ever met, or the luckiest. Nolan shrugged. Little of both, probably. The Varak let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, not a threat. Something closer to gratitude? Nolan smirked. I think we'll get along just fine. The problem with treating a massive, genetically perfected predator wasn't just the immediate risk of being turned into a chew toy. It was the aftermath. The moment Nolan finished treating the Varak, it had fixed him with an unreadable look, then promptly slumped onto the clinic floor and refused to move. This is a problem, Masrick grumbled, standing as far from the open cage as possible. Nolan sighed, hands on his hips. Why? It's recovering. That's what patients do. Masrick jabbed a clawed finger in the direction of the beast, which was now sprawled out like an oversized, battle-scarred house cat. It is lingering. So Varaks do not linger, Masrick hissed. They retreat into the wilderness to heal. They do not remain in the presence of others. Well, Nolan said, gesturing vaguely, looks like this one is making an exception. Masrick let out a low growl of frustration, pacing. The other alien medical professionals were still giving the cage a very wide berth. Even with the creature dozing, none of them seemed eager to test Nolan's apparent magical ability to not be ripped in half. We cannot keep it here, Masrick declared. Why not? Masrick turned on him. Because it will imprint. Nolan blinked. I'm sorry, it will what? Masrick made a guttural noise of exasperation. Varaks do not form social bonds, not with other creatures, but on rare occasions. His claws flexed in irritation. When a Varak is treated during a moment of extreme vulnerability, it may decide that the individual responsible is part of its territory. Wait, Nolan felt something heavy settle in his gut. Are you saying it thinks I am part of its territory now? Masrick's expression darkened. I am saying that if it imprints on you, it will not leave your side. Nolan turned slowly to look at the massive beast, which was still resting but now had one golden eye cracked open, watching him. Oh, Nolan muttered. Well, that's a development. Masrick threw his hands up. This is why we do not treat them. Nolan exhaled. Okay, let's not panic. Maybe it's just resting. Masrick gave him a deadpan look. Maybe. Or maybe it has decided that you are now its den mate and will proceed to eviscerate anything that threatens you.
Right.
At that moment, a sharp chime echoed through the clinic, a station-wide alert. A disembodied voice, crackling slightly through the speakers, spoke in clipped, formal tones. Attention. Unscheduled docking procedure detected in Bay 14. Security teams report immediately. Masrick stiffened. An unauthorized ship. Nolan frowned. That can't be good. The Varak let out a deep, guttural growl. For the first time, Masrick looked almost relieved. At least it is still contained. The words had barely left his mouth when the station lurched. The sudden shift sent trays of medical instruments clattering to the ground. The reinforced cage door, already partially unlatched from earlier, slammed open under the force of impact. The room froze. The Varak, now fully alert, stretched a slow, sinuous movement that made every single alien in the room collectively recoil. It turned its head toward Nolan. Then it stood. Masrick let out a horrified whisper. It is free. Nolan raised both hands in a calming gesture. Nobody move. The Varak padded forward, massive paws nearly silent against the metal floor. The golden eyes locked onto Nolan, pupils narrowing. For a very long moment the room held its breath. Then, without a sound, the Varak pressed its enormous, furred head against Nolan's chest. Masrick made an audible choking noise. Nolan hesitated. Slowly, carefully, he reached up and placed a hand against the creature's thick fur. It didn't flinch. Didn't growl. It simply stood there, as if confirming something to itself. Oh, Nolan murmured. Well, I guess that settles that. Masrick took an unsteady step back. You cannot be serious. Before Nolan could respond, another impact rocked the station, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The clinic doors burst open, and a security officer, bleeding from a wound on his arm, stumbled in. Pirates, he gasped. Armed. They're boarding the station. A distant explosion cut him off. The Varak's ears flicked forward. It let out a low, dangerous sound. Masrick stiffened. We need to evacuate. No, Nolan said, instincts kicking in. We need to help. Masrick gaped at him. Help? Against armed invaders. Nolan turned to the Varak. The massive predator was standing tall now, head high, muscles tense. Its golden eyes were focused entirely on the direction of the sounds. It had no fear. Nolan exhaled. Well, if I am part of its territory now, let's see if that works both ways. He took a step toward the door. The Varak followed. Masrick hissed. You cannot be planning to. But Nolan was already moving. Behind him, the Varak let out a deep, rumbling growl. And then, silent as a shadow, it stalked after him. Masrick groaned. This is madness. But he followed, too. Because for the first time in his life, he saw something more terrifying than a wounded predator. He saw a predator that had chosen its side, and it was about to remind everyone why it was the apex. The air in the corridor was thick with the scent of ozone and scorched metal. Security alarms blared, casting everything in a flickering red light. Nolan moved quickly, staying low, his pulse pounding not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of what he was doing. Behind him, the Varak moved with eerie silence, its massive paws gliding over the station's smooth floor, as if it were stalking prey in its native wilderness. Its golden eyes were locked ahead, ears flicking with each distant sound. Masrick, trailing a few paces back, was breathing heavily, whether from exertion or sheer anxiety. Nolan couldn't tell. This is insane, Masrick muttered. We should be fleeing. Not, he gestured wildly at the Varak. Whatever this is. Listen, Nolan whispered, pressing himself against a bulkhead. Security's outnumbered. If these pirates take control of the station, it's not just us in danger, it's everyone. Masrick's frills flattened in exasperation. And what exactly is your plan? Nolan peeked around the corner. 3 armed figures in mismatched combat gear were moving down the corridor, scanning the rooms. Their weapons looked salvaged but deadly coil guns, maybe low-grade plasma rifles. He turned back, lowering his voice. I walk out there. They see an unarmed human vet, they get cocky. Then, he gestured to the Varak. Nature takes its course. Masrick stared at him. That is your plan. Nolan shrugged. Got a better one. Masrick opened his mouth, then closed it. He exhaled sharply. I hate humans. Nolan grinned. You'll live. Before Masrick could argue further, Nolan stepped into the corridor, hands raised in a universal sign of surrender. The pirates whirled, weapons snapping up. Ho, Nolan said, keeping his posture relaxed. I'm just a doctor. One of them, a thick-bodied alien with segmented armor plating along its limbs, tilted its head. What kind of doctor? Nolan smiled. The kind that keeps things alive. Mostly. The second pirate, a wiry, insectoid creature, chittered in amusement. Bad day for you, then Doc. The third pirate, a gruff-looking humanoid, grinned, stepping forward. I like humans, he said, voice gravelly. Easy to break. Nolan sighed. Yeah, about that. A shadow shifted behind him. The Varak emerged from the corridor like a nightmare given form. The pirates barely had time to react before it let out a sound so deep, so primal, it vibrated in the walls. The humanoid pirate fired first. Big mistake. The shot barely left his weapon before the Varak moved. One moment it was behind Nolan. The next it was on the pirate. There was no dramatic fight, no struggle. Just an instant, fluid motion, claws flashing, a muffled scream, and then silence. The second pirate let out a panicked shriek and bolted. The Varak launched itself, covering the distance in a single, unnatural leap. It didn't even need to kill. One swipe sent the pirate crashing into the wall, unconscious before he hit the ground. The third pirate tried to run. He didn't make it. In less than 5 seconds, the corridor was silent again. Masrick stepped out from behind cover, looking pale. Nolan exhaled, glancing at the Varak. Its fur was bristling, but it turned its head toward him, waiting. You good? Nolan asked. The Varak let out a soft huff. Masrick gestured at the devastation. That is exactly why we do not treat them. Nolan ignored him, stepping over the fallen pirates. We need to get to the control hub. If they've already taken over the station systems, we're in trouble. Masrick let out a strangled sound. We are already in trouble. But Nolan was already moving. The Varak padded after him, tail flicking. Masrick groaned and followed. The control hub was a mess. Security forces had put up a fight, but it was clear they had been overwhelmed. Half a dozen bodies littered the floor, some groaning in pain, others completely still. The main console was still active, but 4 heavily armed pirates stood guard. Nolan crouched behind a maintenance console, taking it all in. Masrick knelt beside him, looking like he was deeply regretting every decision that led him to this moment. The Varak remained still, golden eyes flicking between the pirates. Masrick exhaled. All right, what is your brilliant plan now? Nolan considered. Same as before, but bigger. Masrick looked like he wanted to throw himself into an airlock. Nolan adjusted his stance, took a breath, and then he walked straight into the control room. The pirates reacted instantly, guns snapping toward him. Hold it right there, one barked. Nolan raised his hands again. Easy. Just a doctor. No weapons. The leader, a tall, scarred alien with cybernetic implants, tilted her head. And what exactly are you doing here, Doctor? Nolan gave a sheepish smile. Would you believe me if I said I got lost? She smirked. No. Then she raised her weapon. Nolan sighed. Didn't think so. The Varak struck like a force of nature. It moved so fast that the pirates barely had time to react before 2 of them were already down. The third managed a wild shot, harmlessly deflecting off reinforced plating. The Varak slammed into the 4th pirate, pinning them with one massive paw. The leader staggered back, eyes wide. What in the pa? Nolan stepped forward, brushing dust from his jacket. I'd surrender if I were you. The leader glanced between Nolan, the Varak, and her rapidly diminishing options. Then slowly she dropped her weapon. Masrick stumbled into the room, eyes wide, looking between the wreckage and Nolan. You, he exhaled. I do not understand humans. Nolan grinned, moving to the control panel. You're not the first to say that he tapped a few keys, bringing up the station's security override. Looks like we're clear. Security can mop up the rest. The Varak padded over to him, sniffing the air. Then, without warning, it bumped its massive head against his shoulder. Masrick let out a horrified wheeze. It is bonding with you. Nolan reached up and scratched behind the Varak's ears. It let out a pleased rumble. Masrick looked like he wanted to die. Nolan smirked. Told you it was just scared. The Varak huffed. Masrick muttered something in his own language that was probably very unkind. Nolan just laughed. The aftermath of a pirate attack was a mess. Security forces, now regaining control of the station, stormed in, checking for survivors and taking stock of the damage. Injured personnel were being hauled to med bays, alarms were gradually silenced, and station administrators were already beginning the long process of writing up reports that no one would actually read. Nolan stood near the control hub, arms crossed, as a security officer, a broad-shouldered reptilian with a missing horn, grumbled while scanning through a datapad. Let me get this straight, the officer said. You, a civilian veterinarian, decided to take matters into your own hands, and he gestured vaguely to the control room, still littered with unconscious or groaning pirates, used an Apex Varak to dismantle a train boarding party. Nolan shrugged. Yeah. Masrick, standing a few feet away, let out a long, suffering groan. Say it again, slowly. Listen to how deranged it sounds. The officer snorted, shaking his head. You're lucky it worked. We had 3 squads pinned down when the station locked them out. That was your doing. Nolan gave a thumbs up. Pirates love hacking security grids. Turns out they hate when you reroute the doors to trap them in supply closets. The officer exhaled. You're either a genius or a lunatic. Little of both, Nolan said. There was a heavy thud beside him. The Varak had plopped down, watching the interaction with sharp golden eyes. The officer took an uneasy step back, and this. Nolan scratched behind the Varak's ears. The massive predator let out a low, pleased rumble, leaning into the touch. Masrick buried his face in his hands. She's mine now, Nolan said casually. The officer blinked. I'm sorry, what? Masrick lifted his head, looking haunted. He has imprinted on it, or it on him. Either way, it will not leave his side. The officer looked between them, then at the massive, battle-scarred predator now happily accepting head scratches. Station policy says dangerous wildlife must be confined to a holding sector, the officer said. Nolan raised an eyebrow. You want to be the one to tell her that. The officer opened his mouth, glanced at the Varak, then very wisely shut it again. Masrick groaned. This is a disaster. The Varak lifted its head and made a soft huffing noise, something almost amused. Nolan smirked. I don't know. I think it's a win. Masrick threw his hands up. Do you even understand what you have done? Varaks are solitary, yet you have turned it into some kind of companion animal. Nolan tilted his head. So. Masrick sputtered. So, you are a human. You are not supposed to be able to tame an apex predator. Nolan grinned, patting the Varak's thick fur. Funny thing about humans. We tend to make friends in the weirdest places. Masrick let out an actual whimper of frustration. The officer shook his head, clearly deciding this was no longer his problem. All right, fine, just don't let it eat anyone. Nolan gave a thumbs up. No promises. The officer walked away. Masrick stared at Nolan. You are actually going to keep it? Nolan shrugged. She likes me. You really think I could get rid of her if I tried? As if to confirm his point, the Varak stood, stretched, and then bumped its massive head against Nolan's side again. Masrick made a strangled sound. Nolan laughed. 2 days later, Nolan sat in his cramped station quarters, half asleep at his desk, when he felt a warm gust of breath on his neck. He cracked an eye open. The Varak who he had started calling Sable was curled up in the corner, watching him with those sharp golden eyes. She was healing well. The wound on her flank was sealed, her movements more fluid. She had taken to following him everywhere, much to the horror of the station's inhabitants. Even the security teams had learned to give both of them a wide berth. Nolan yawned. "You hungry?" Sable huffed, then rested her head on her paws. "I'll take that as a no." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had come to Varlos Prime to work on rare alien species to heal creatures that no one else understood. Somehow, he had ended up with a Varak as a personal bodyguard. Life was weird. "Ben." He looked at Sable again. "You know, Maastricht says you shouldn't be like this." Sable flicked an ear. Nolan smirked. "I think you just like proving people wrong." The Varak closed her eyes. He exhaled, stretching. "Yeah," he muttered. "Me too." Sable let out a soft, contented rumble. And for the first time in a long while, Nolan felt right where he was supposed to be.